graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
No, I love it. And this is where I've remembered now. This is where I went, she sounds like Mrs. Havesham.
Yep, that was it. And I was like, who? And then I immediately, I went to the bookstore not too long after we had spoken and picked up a copy of the book. And I was like, oh, yep, okay, I see it.
Do you know what? Maybe you could write a paper comparing the two characters.
Let me write that down now. Because like as I said, you know, and you know, it's been a while since I've gotten my PhD. I've done different things with my life. I'm now actually in like travel and lifestyle writing. And so, but I'm trying to like ease my way back in. So I did that thing that I swore I would never do. And I totally applied for a conference without having a paper written.
Yeah. Wow.
So just, you know, we'll see. That could, you know, necessarily be a paper topic.
It could be, because if you compare what happens with Mrs. Havisham and how she then takes Philip in and does everything, it's not the same as Gandhi because he's a young boy, but he grows up into this society and he becomes a man, you know, of higher class, etc., etc. And it's quite interesting. I think that would be really interesting, looking at poverty.
There's definitely something there. And it's like you said, not sure like what, but there could be. And you will definitely get a mention in the paper.
Love it. Please do. I need it right now. So the next point is, you know, we're looking at the British Empire, right? And in terms of them going into India, we know what was happening with Madeleine Slade, who's then changing her name to Mira Behn. For those people who don't know, please read you know, Tamala's thesis. The link will be at the bottom. So we're now in India and she's there. She's now, well, we chose not to use this word previously. I said she was a disciple, and Gandhi didn't like his followers to be called disciples. I think I remember that comment. Yeah. So she's not a disciple, but she's a follower. Right? So in terms of the British Empire then, what did they do that pushed Madeleine Slade and the likes of Gandhi to be against their vision, their mission and purpose towards India and also the locals that were there?
And I think in terms of Madeleine Slade, I don't think that she particularly, and again, I can only speak as someone who's done the research. I have never, you know, she passed in 1982. I've never had, you know, unfortunately got the chance to speak with her, but through what I was able to research about her, I don't necessarily think that her gripe of anything was against the empire itself. I believe her inspiration was her love of Gandhi. And I touched on this a little bit, is she had started off with a fascination with Beethoven, and it was a very similar, hyper-focused, she organized concerts and got composers to come out and like play Beethoven's music. Like she had this attachment to Beethoven. And as I said, life and stuff moved on. She reads this biography of Gandhi, and she essentially takes that attachment from Beethoven and attaches it to Gandhi. So as I said, with her, I don't necessarily think it was anything against the empire itself, especially as a British woman. I think she really, she loved Gandhi and she loved Gandhi's beliefs and came to believe what Gandhi believed through just following him and following his beliefs. But hers, I guess, was definitely more of a personal attachment rather than an overall like ideal attachment. With Gandhi, and I can't remember if we had started the recording while we were talking about this previously. So we had talked about how Gandhi's life took all these different turns. Like he's, a lot of people, he don't know or just kind of glossed over. He spent time in South Africa studying and learning, and brought back ideas from there to come back to India with. And I think for him, it was all about, in terms of the empire, I believe it was about having, and again, not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think it was more about like the independence of India and India's identity, like not being a part of the empire. Like Britain was Britain and India is India. And I think that's, again, if I've never got a chance to speak with Gandhi, obviously, but I think that's a lot of what, was just that, what it is to be Indian and to be separate from the British, like, and a lot of it too is, and I touch on this in my dissertation, is there would be rules put in place, and then like the British would say like, oh, we'll give you these concessions and these concessions and these concessions, but it would always be like this just unattainable goal. And the goalpost just kept getting moved, and the promises just kept going unfulfilled. And Gandhi, and among other freedom fighters, if that's, a term you want to use, definitely picked up on that, because at first, I think there was a lot, especially in like the later 1800s and the early 1900s, you saw more, I don't want to say cooperation is not the term, but I think there was more of a belief that the British would eventually like concede and, slowly back away. And as I said, I think as time went on, just more and more people noticed like this goal is unattainable. This goalpost just keeps getting moved and moved and moved and moved. And if we don't do something and if we don't stand up, like this may never come.
No, that is really interesting, but I'm going to ask you, this is your opinion. I know that this is not your research. At the moment, there is a trend to say, let us look into the education system and try and decolonize it. There are a lot of papers coming out left, right, and center. What are your thoughts on that?
So there has been a lot on that recently, not with just like the decolonization of education, but the what is the term that is being used is like the breaking the silence of the archives. Is a lot of people don't think about, like when we were talking earlier about like how do you choose what sources you use and what sources you don't use, and a lot of it is you use what's available. And there is a lot of decision making that goes into when you're creating an archive, which is where a lot of us do our research. What do you save? What goes into the archive? And who is making those decisions on what is saved and what is not? And that is something that scholars are definitely starting to take notice of now, is not so much what is the information in front of me, but research gaps and things, knowledge gaps. What was the information that was left out? And so I think that looking at education and looking at research and looking at everything that we're doing through all of these different lenses is, well, for one, fascinating, but two, I think it's going to be difficult because we're challenging so many like narratives and the way that things have been done before. And, you know, it's always hard to like try something new and challenge the status quo. You know, we were talking about AI before, and it's like, what do we do with this shiny new thing? And I don't know. I think that in terms of, again, breaking the, I believe the terms that I've used is like breaking the silences of the archives and filling in those gaps and decolonizing education. I think it's going to be fascinating. I think that it's just going to add one more layer of knowledge, but like many times in terms of change, it's going to be kicking and screaming to get there.
No, I love that, because it is quite difficult to accept change, isn't it? And again, like you said, they're decision makers, and the DMs, they have to decide what is and what isn't. And to understand how they decide is important, but also it will make us challenge even more, because then we'll be thinking, no, actually, that doesn't make sense. Or maybe it does. Who knows, right?
Yeah. And or even as someone who has worked in archives and been the person to like use you know, try and like dig the rusted on paper clips, and like me wondering like, who stapled this? Why were we using staples? Like, because it's also now rusted on. And like, not only like what we keep and what we don't keep, but also like, how is it filed? Like, there's, we have set systems and stuff, or whatever organization with might have a set system, but they also might not. And so like, how does this get filed where? And does a paper like slide underneath to the bottom of the file folders? And that, I think that's where new research comes from, is all of that stuff. So yeah, no, there's just, and again, you and I had kind of touched on this before we hit the record button. It's just like, not only has the world changed in like just the past decades, but even in the 3 years since you and I last spoke,
Literally,
so much has changed in terms of research, knowledge. Not only what information are we accessing, but how are we accessing it?
no, it's scary, it's exciting, but it's very uncertain as well. It's like a world of the unknown. I think that's how I can describe it, which moves me on to the next question, which has to do with the British Empire and your paper as well, in terms of its impact on climate change during the colonial era. Could you take us through that? Because I think that's interesting.
Yes, this is one of those things that also has like gotten shelved since 2019. Now it's been 5 years. So it's like, if I really want to touch on this, like I'm gonna have I don't want to like, how do I say this? Like, I don't want to say like, oh, I'm gonna have to write a completely different paper because I'm gonna talk myself out of it. But I can imagine in the 5 years since I first wrote this paper, I wrote it originally for a class and then turned it into a conference paper. But the idea behind the paper was, I was in a climate change and history course, and my professor was super awesome. He was just like, just like work on your dissertation. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna like, I want to see like climate change. How does climate change like, what is the conversation it is having with my dissertation? And that was like, it was the idea of, you know, that's one of the things that we're talking about now as a global society is climate change. And, you know, who are some of the, you know, who's leaving the biggest carbon footprint? And, you know, some of these more populous countries who, you know, who didn't get to develop as a country with the initial industrial revolution or develop as much. Are now being impeded, and for the past however many decades have been impeded by like the new environmental regulations. And some of the arguments that are presented are like, well, while you were breaking these environmental regulations that didn't exist in the early 20th century and developing, we were colonized and unable to develop in the ways that you were developing. So we're just trying to catch up. And I talked about the automotive industry, and again, I apologize. I said it was when I originally did all this research, it's about 5 years ago, so it's a little fuzzy. I was able to look at it recently because, again, same with my dissertation, was like, all right, maybe I'm ready to maybe I'm ready to dig into this again. As a completely tangent thing, I will say, for anyone out there who is an independent scholar, can really feel with this, it is so much harder to do research when you are no longer affiliated with a university. And that is something I definitely took for granted as a university student, is when I first started thinking about, getting back into my dissertation work and re-looking at some of these older papers for, potential publication or book chapter purposes or anything like that. I would go to JSTOR, or I would go to, pick an online database, and they'd be like, well, what's your login? And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really have that anymore, but I'll make a personal one. And your access as just like an individual human being is minimal to none, or it is an exorbitant fee compared to when you have that university access. And so, talking about like, this research that I'm doing or have done in the past, I'm like, oh yeah, actually, I would love to look into that. But I'm also trying to figure out, how do I get back to the databases that I used to have so much free access to, or included in the price of tuition access to. But yeah, back to the climate change idea, was the idea of, again, it just ties back to the empire's impact on modern day climate change issues within India, and just basically how that's just the idea, is what was going on during the time of the empire that is impacting the world today in terms of modernization and climate change.
No, thank you very much for explaining. I think you mentioned something important there, to say, for example, say the Global South is saying we're playing catch up because you've done your thing now. Now you're telling us how to run our lives, when we want to do the same thing, essentially. So in terms of your opinion then, would you say, and this is just me just thinking out there, would you say that the British Empire has a responsibility to go back to the nations that they conquered and to assist them to do it right, instead of saying you have to, because they got stuff out of it? I mean, we have the Commonwealth, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
we have that. But I feel, would you agree with me to say they need to go back? Because if, for example, they're factories and they're producing the clothing that we wear here, we'll pick India, does that. We know, because we've seen the documentaries and, on the news and stuff. Perfumes that, Jordan, Egypt, etc., Marc Jacobs, to name a few, that's where their plants come from, right? Exactly. And essentially, would you say that the British Empire has that responsibility to go back and assist them to build a better infrastructure? Or would you say I'm reaching?
I don't know necessarily if reaching is the word I would use, but I would definitely say I would exchange out the word responsibility for conversation, because and again, with each country, it would be a different conversation, because you also want to take in the idea of agency. Like, what would those conversations look like? What does that responsibility look like? And because it's an interesting, because we talk about that in with the idea of and I'm not naming names or anything like that, but the British Museum is a very popular conversation topic amongst people and the items within the British Museum. And it's a very similar conversation of like, well, do the items go back? How do the items go back, if the items go back? And who's going back to the word responsibility? Whose responsibility is that? And again, I would say I would exchange it for the word conversation, and each each conversation would have to be dependent on what the formerly colonized, what are they looking to get out of it? Do they want like a monetary obligation, or do they just want a technological, or and each need could be different. So yeah, that would be my opinion there. And it's like, and I thank you so much for prefacing that, because it's like, I am not an expert on international relations or policy. That is not what my PhD is in. And so yes, for anybody watching or listening, this is purely, my thoughts, my opinions.
Literally just opinions, because I think it's quite interesting, because we know that the global south is moving towards the Western world, whereas us who are in the Western world, we're trying to go back to our roots in terms of local farmers produce our food and staying away from supermarkets and buying things that are made for life instead of fast fashion, because we have that awareness, but we can only make that choice because we can afford that lifestyle, essentially, because you can choose what you like, what you want. Even for tea, you can choose what you want to eat for your dinner, for breakfast. Some people don't have that choice. So no, thank you very much for sharing your opinion. Now, moving on to your current situ, which is you're applying for jobs to get back into higher education. What does that transition look like? Because I spoke to somebody, and I'm going to make you laugh, like Dr. Tamala, and he was just like, Noma, do you know what? I'm done with this life. I've handed it in. There's so much red tape. He went off. He worked in industry for massive, massive brands that are known globally, because he's an engineer by trade. And then he's come back for a part two. He was like, no, I'm coming back. I think I want to do more public speaking. And I was like, do you remember me saying, actually, industry is not that far off, the work politics, the red tape, applying to get a laptop, a new mouse, it takes weeks and weeks, to get that signed off. And he was like, no, do you know what? I'm ready. So coming back to you, what has that been like?
So it has been interesting. And again, we won't need to go into my whole life story, but we can just say, for reasons being of my life, I didn't get to necessarily apply straight to the academic job market, which is what you do as you are in the last semester of your PhD. That's what you do, is you just apply for the next season of academic jobs. I didn't do that. I moved to Germany with my husband, which 10 out of 10 would do again. And as I said, I work now in travel, in lifestyle writing and editing, and I love it. It's great. But that need for research, that need to it's still there, that. And, so again, fast forward to life, we're in a position now where it's okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hop into the academic job market. And, it is really, it's an interesting point of view to go at it as somebody who's not doing it quote unquote the way you're supposed to do it. Because what a lot of people don't realize is when you're looking at postdocs, for example, there's a time limit for postdocs. That you have to be within a certain amount of years from graduating to apply for postdocs. And I'm in for some of these, I'm in that last year of being able to apply. So I'm oh yeah, let me go ahead and apply for this real quickly. I'm also reaching out to what's the word I'm looking for, my advisors and stuff, who I'm asking them to speak about not only my past work, but work that I've kind of been doing on the side, to try and just keep a foot in. I've been doing some book review editing and things like that. And it's just very weird because I can't use my modern, or not modern, but my how do I say this, my contemporary contacts, because academia is such a close-knit circle that they want your PhD references. They want to speak to your PhD advisor. And I'm just hey, I'm sure you're really tired 3 years later of talking about working with me and working with my dissertation, but I'm hoping this is the last time I will come to you about this. And I've also been going at it as someone who is not only looking in the United States, but I like Europe. Europe's very nice. So I've also been like looking at, universities and colleges in Europe as well. And that's been a challenge in and of itself, is because when you are not, and I'm sure people who apply from outside the United States run into a similar problem, you also have to find somebody willing to sponsor your visa. Like, so not only do they have to want to hire you, they have to want to hire you enough to like sponsor you as like a human being living in their country. So you have to like really shine. And it's a very humbling experience, because going back to what we were talking about, like how you have to be like, I'm the best, I'm awesome. Mm-hmm. And like, in fact, yesterday, I just got an email that was like, oh, we didn't realize you needed sponsorship. This is not a hard to fill position. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Thought my PhD, made me special, but apparently this is not hard to fill. So, yeah, it is wild. It is challenging. Some days I just like want to give up, and I'm like, you know what? I like what I do now. I don't know why I'm trying to change things. Like, just keep doing what I'm doing. And, I don't need to do this. And then sometimes like, okay, let's do this. Let's get back out there. So, I would definitely, to anybody who's watching and listening right now, I would say, like, if you are in that, last year or last semester and you're thinking about it, mm-hmm. like, talk to your advisors, talk to those around you, and really get used to getting your feet wet now while you have your advisors, 2 doors over and not an email away or a Teams call away. Like, use the resources that you have now. And I would also say to people who may not be going straight into the market, like, or the job market like I did, like, get those letters of references up front. That will help, but also, maintain contact with people, because that is something that I have done over the years is, you grow very close to the people that you work with in your graduate program. And like it was less awkward to have to go back to them 3 years later, because it wasn't just coming out of nowhere. Like, we've had conversations since then. Like, we've talked about, the work that they're doing, the work that I'm doing. And so it's not just a like working relationship. It's just like maintain your contacts, and not just for like work purposes, but just because like, they're interesting. And, I wouldn't say like I have friendships with these people, but like we have a very good like working collegial relationship. I'm trying to think of like, what's the adverb for colleague?
No, I love it. And, building relationships is very important in any sector, I think. It doesn't matter. But I think, what we're understanding here from a PhD perspective, it takes so long for you to get into a PhD program because you get a lot of no's. And it's the same when you're coming back if you do go away, because it's, the publications, they're important in order for you to get a job. Like you said, postdoc, there's an expiry date as well with that. I think one of the previous guests, he's actually relocated as well from the US to Europe because he couldn't get what he needed in the US. So he's moved to Europe and left his family behind as well. So it's quite difficult to get it in. I think that's the simple way of saying it.
And not to like dehumanize anybody, but there's definitely like a shiny new toy feeling. And but see, you get it. I see the smile. See, you get it. And especially with like when you're graduating and you've got like, your research, and you're like, oh yes, here's my like brand new, fresh off the printer dissertation, and here's what I'm going to do with it. And to any, university or college or organizations you're applying to, like, you are that shiny new toy. But as more time goes on between the time that you graduate and, try to, enter the market or re-enter the market, like, you are no longer the shiny new toy, and shinier, newer toys have come out with potentially cooler, more in vogue research. And like, now, not only are you competing against the people that you were competing with X amount of years ago, you're competing with the new people and every single person who has entered the market since you left. Not to scare anybody, right?
No, I think that is very honest. Professor Glenn said the same thing. He said, as a PhD or a scientist, basically, whether social sciences or the other sciences, basically you're an entrepreneur and you always have to have your elevator pitch ready. And it's not everybody that's going to listen. So you'll get a lot of no's before you get a yes, essentially, which is what you're saying, because there's always a new toy. Look at all the AI companies that have come out, from ChatGPT to everything. Now we're getting confused because there's so many, and there's so many versions as well. It's like it's always
And the
improving.
technology is growing faster than the
Mhm.
regulations for
Yeah.
said technology. Like
And
again, we were talking about this earlier, like not only do
Mm.
we have these shiny new toys, we don't know how to play with these toys.
Exactly. But then sometimes I find myself, I mean, I don't know this man very well, but I find I can relate to some of the things that he does say, and I'm sure people will be annoyed with me in terms of Elon Musk, because he does say that we need governance, when it comes to AI. And he says basically, if we don't have governance, we'll find ourselves whereby we're looking back and going, oops, and it'll be too late. And I interviewed, I've forgotten her name. She's in, I think, the Netherlands, and her research is actually on AI. And she was saying, Norma, do you know what? There won't be a lot of jobs in academia, because if AI takes over, why do you need a professor to teach? Because it's white paper based, especially for social sciences. It's like, think about it really. Do we actually need geography? Do we need English literature, English language? It's just going through. She's like, we will be out of a job. And I was like, didn't look at it that way. But here we are.
I have been having this discussion at work, and we could have a whole nother episode on AI and AI usage. And this was a conversation I've been having at my job for over a year now, because as someone who does, like, I do travel articles and things like that. And I will, when researching somewhere that I've never been before, like I will do, my typical search and usually pull up the first few Google pages. Never look on page 1, y'all. Like always go to pages 2, 3, and 4. Like dig deep. But when I can do, that research in an X amount of time and pull X information and write my article. Whereas, AI can pull from, tens of thousands of Google searches. Now, at this point, it's not, and again, I'm not an AI expert, but it's not quite able to differentiate. It's just able to pull the information and put it together into, and like you can say like a 500-word essay or whatever, but you don't necessarily know where it's pulling from, what's correct. And you would still have to fact check it along the way. But there's no telling what it's going to be able to do in 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years. So, as someone who's very aware of, my job could be very easily replaced by AI at some point in the future. These are conversations we could be having and should be having.
So then I think the scary part is, if you look at manufacturing, they're very automized, aren't they? They're going towards that anyway. They don't need a lot of staff like they used to. Look at logistics. The Arctics are, automatic. You need a license, but really and truly, it moves, right? So if you look at the world, the way it's moving, you just ask yourself, what are all these people going to be doing? Are we going to go back into farming?
And that is, I don't necessarily want to say like, there's a positive way to look at this, but and just as a history major, I don't think we're going to get to the positive part first. But the idea is yeah, if we're automating and artificially intelligencing all of these jobs, and maybe the idea is that people don't have to be at a job 30 to 40 hours a week. And what do you do with that time? And how do we restructure society in a way like, because now it's just the idea, it's a very simple concept. I go to work, I am paid in exchange for my labor at work, and I use that money that I receive to purchase goods and services and things that I need. It's a very, you know, simple idea. But if everybody's jobs, are being replaced, and we're like, how do we rethink? And again, I am not the person to answer this. So hopefully, I'm sure somebody will, who specializes in this will come on the show and talk about it. But like, how do we restructure society in a way that it's, what do we exchange? If it's not time, labor, money, do we all go back to farming? Do we turn, do some people turn to farming? Some people turn to the arts? Do we all just go back to, knowledge collecting and restoration, and how do we do that? What does that look like? Oh my gosh, we're going to restructure society here, Noma.